Thank you for joining us for tonight's program on Unlocking the Power of Purpose with Dr. Richard Leider and Terry Minger. I'm Claire Noble, the Director of Programming for the Vail Symposium. On behalf of Chris Sable, our Executive Director, Dale Mosier, our Board Chairman, and the entire Vail Symposium Board, welcome. We're celebrating 50 years of convening locally and thinking globally. We're hosting this program in collaboration with the Alliance for Purposeful Living, a new organization with many familiar faces. Two items to be aware of before we get started this evening. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option for Q&A. That's where you'll type your questions for tonight's speakers. You can type those questions in there at any time. We'll get to those questions later in the program, and we'll get to as many as time permits. Tonight's program will run until 7:15. It's being recorded, and you'll be able to find that recording at vailsymposium.org. I'd like to take just a moment to thank the organizations and individuals who've helped make tonight's program possible. Our sponsors include the Town of Vail, Vail Resorts Epic Promise, the Antlers at Vail, and the Vail Daily. Our virtual programs are sponsored by Alpine Bank. Cindy Ingalls and Leela and Walt Misher have underwritten the summer season. Underwriters for tonight are Karen and John Maxwell and Gabrielle and Bill Mimless. The Vail Symposium is also supported by a generous grant from the Frechette Family Foundation. Thank you to all of our donors. We couldn't do it without you. I'd like to take just a moment to tell you about two upcoming programs. A week from tonight, on Thursday, September 23rd, we have a special longer format environmental awareness program that's going to focus on a variety of solutions to the environmental challenges facing us. We'll begin at 5 p.m., which is an hour earlier than typical. And at first, we'll look at the promise of seaweed with Dr. Nicole Price. Our last speaker will come on at 7 p.m., and it's Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, the Chief Science Officer for the Nature Conservancy. And between those two speakers, we'll also discuss beavers, fermentation, carbon tax, and solar schools. It's going to be a fun program, and I hope you'll join us. And then on Tuesday, September 28th, we're back in person with fan favorite Timothy Standring of the Denver Art Museum with a preview of the museum's upcoming exhibit, Whistler to Cassatt. Again, that's on a Tuesday evening, September 28th, and we'll be at the Vail Interfaith Chapel. Tonight, we turn our attention to the power of purpose, which can help us live longer and live better. So why do you get up in the morning? Internationally best-selling author and coach Richard Leider is founder of Inventure, the Purpose Company, where the mission is to help people unlock the power of purpose and answer that question. He's ranked by Forbes as one of the top 5 most respected coaches. He's written 11 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. The Power of Purpose and Repacking Your Bags are considered classics in the personal growth field. His latest book, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old, is a defining book on the power of purposeful aging. Publishers Weekly writes, for readers inclined to live an examined life, this will provide much food for thought. Widely viewed as a pioneer of the global purpose movement, his work has been featured in many media sources, and his PBS special, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by millions of people. He's taken his purpose message to all 50 states, Canada, and 4 continents, and he's advised everyone from ARP to the National Football League to the United States State Department. During his career, Richard has addressed more than 2 million people worldwide in his speeches to corporate, association, and social service groups. He and his wife, Sally, live in the Minneapolis area. Welcome, Richard Leider.
Claire, thank you so much for a very kind introduction, and it's really an honor to be part of the symposium. I've been really looking forward to this. So I want to start by doing a spoiler alert here. The spoiler alert is, because I just came out with a new book on aging, the spoiler alert is this: you're getting older. Aging isn't optional, but growing older is optional. So get old or grow old, you choose. And what I want to start with is this, that purpose is basically not a luxury for the wealthy. It's not a luxury for the educated. It's not a luxury for any particular group. It is fundamental. We now know it's self-evident, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, that the science is there, that purpose is fundamental to health, to healing, to happiness, and even to longevity. So let's look at this first slide that says getting old or growing old. And it shows the juxtaposition of basically two people, or one person, two. And so can we have that slide that says getting old or growing old? The story here is that I've been interviewing elders, people over the age of 65 for 35 years or 40 years. And I've asked them if they could live their life over, what would they do differently? And the same thing comes up over and over again, that aging is not a disease. It's a design problem, because we're now living longer. In 1900, the average life expectancy was 47. Now the average life expectancy is in the 80s, 85 and older. So are you getting old or growing old? Well, getting old, as I said, is not an option, but growing is. And so three things have come up in my interviews over the years, including for the recent book I just co-authored with my partner in crime, David Shapiro, who's a philosophy professor in Seattle. Number one, people said if they could live their life over, they would be more reflective the second time around. They would step back and look at the big picture and not just let pain or crisis determine their own reflection. Secondly, they would be more courageous. They would take more risks, particularly in the areas of work and love. Freud kind of had it right. He said that the two areas that generate the most pleasure and the most pain are our working lives, our creative lives, and our relational lives. And people said, I wish I would have been more effective and more mature in that zone. And then the third thing, so reflection and courage, the third thing was people said, I want my life to matter. Every single person, we're talking about hundreds of people I've interviewed over the years, and including this last years during the pandemic, say they want their life to matter. They want to leave their dent on the planet while they're here. So we grow up twice. Think about it. We grow up twice. First, we grow up from childhood to adulthood. We make that shift, hopefully. And then the new shift is from adulthood to elderhood. As we're growing older, we may be living in elderhood longer, or as long as we were in child rearing years or working years prior to that. So that's a new narrative that's needed. And so we all need three things to really grow old: money, medicine, and meaning. The three M's. Money, certainly we need enough to survive. And the question for all of us is, how much is enough? And how are we going to make sure we have enough and sustain enough? Secondly, medicine, which is not really pharmaceuticals, it's health. We all know people who have enough money and enough health, but don't have much meaning and are struggling with that. So the third M is meaning. And that's the one I want to dig into. I want to do right now what I would call a purpose checkup with you. Just like you might do a car checkup or a health checkup or a financial checkup. How about a life checkup? Purpose is age agnostic. It could be that you're younger, or it could be that you're midlife, or that you're older. But how about pushing the pause button here this evening and stepping back and looking at your life from a broader perspective? So as I said, purpose is fundamental and it's age agnostic, and it requires money, medicine, and meaning. So the next slide shows purpose with a small p, because sometimes when I talk about purpose and I make the definition or the distinction, between purpose with a big P and purpose with a small p, oh, there's a sigh of relief. People say, oh, thankfully, I always thought I had to have something to save the world. I had to have a cause. I had to be Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa, or, I had to have something really big in life. But I'm out there making a living, and I'm out there making a life in certain ways. So I talk about purpose with a big P, but tonight I want to talk about purpose with a small p. Purpose in everyday life, because purpose is a verb. Purpose is something we actually do. It's not just having a purpose. It's actually living purposefully day to day. Big distinction between having a purpose, which would be a big P perhaps, and living purposefully on a day-to-day basis. And the American essayist E.B. White said this. He said, I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Well, save and savor, not literally save the world, but it is making our contribution, making our dent. There are 1,440 purpose moments in a day, purpose minutes. Every minute is a chance to step in and make a difference in someone else's life, to make a positive contribution. But keep in mind that everyone listening here is an experiment of one. We get to decide, we get to choose how we're going to make that work in our lives. And so as I said earlier, the next slide shows purpose being fundamental. Purpose, when I did a PBS special, I went to neuroscience labs across the country, interviewed neuroscientists who were studying purpose in the brain, purpose in health, purpose in well-being. And one of those people held up a pill like this and said, Richard, would you buy this? And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, this pill will reduce the qualitative or improve the qualitative life of people with Alzheimer's, will reduce the incidence of macroscopic stroke by 41%, will help with sleep apnea and other sleep disorders, and will add 7 to 10 years to your life. Would you buy it? And I said, well, of course, who wouldn't? How much is it? And he smiled at me. His name is Dr. Majid Fatoui at Johns Hopkins. And he said, Richard, you know the answer. It's purpose. We now can measure purpose in the brain. It's not just purpose, but purpose is fundamental along with other things for a healthy life. And we now know that purpose is something that is universal. And both science and faith agree that purpose is fundamental. So let me give you a purpose now. So you can't get off tonight saying, oh, well, I'll get around to this. I'd like to give you the prescription for purpose that I've learned over almost 5 decades now. And it's only 2 words. And I'm going to circle back to it at the end here, but the 2 words are grow and give. A purposeful life is one where we're growing and we're giving. Full stop. That's the default purpose. So log that in for a moment and ask yourself, why do you get up in the morning? Do you get up to grow and give or not? And so we'll take a look at that. The next slide is one of my breakthroughs. I spent a week with this man, Viktor Frankl, way back when I was getting out of graduate school in counseling psychology, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And you'd think you'd figure that out in graduate school, but in counseling, but it's about other people. And I studied Viktor Frankl, who wrote the classic book, Man's Search for Meaning, and which is, according to the US Library of Congress, one of the 25 most influential books in American history. Frankl was a man, Jewish, doctor, Vienna, Austria, taken by the Nazis at the height of the Nazi regime. And he and his family went to the concentration camps. His whole family was exterminated. His pregnant wife, Tilly, killed. His grandparents, parents, and siblings, done. He survived. He was liberated from Auschwitz after 3 or 3.5 years. He weighed 87 pounds. He went back to Vienna to heal, to practice medicine again, hopefully. And after he healed, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. And he said this: the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that's the bottom line of purpose. Purpose is a choice. It's an aim. It's not a role and it's not a goal. It's an aim on how we want to live our lives and how we want to make a contribution to others. Sometimes we're pushed by pain and sometimes we're pulled by possibility when it comes to our lives. He was obviously pushed by pain. Concentration camp, I can't imagine. But after I spent a week with him in San Diego, 5 days where you could hear a pin drop, I decided that my life's purpose, my calling, was to help others to discover their purpose. Purpose creates resiliency. He could get up in the morning in the concentration camp and give somebody else a kind word, a crust of bread, hope, a hug, and for himself to envision his life when he left there. It wasn't everything. There were other things, obviously, but tragic optimism, optimism in the face of adversity. Look at the pandemic over the last 18 months or so. And some people come out of that growing and other people don't. And so this whole notion of tragic optimism is really at the heart of purpose. As Frankl said, say yes to life. In spite of everything, say yes to life. And he said this: don't ask, what is my purpose? Ask, what is life asking of me now? What is life asking of you now in your life, in this situation that you're in, whatever it may be? And so that's the why question. Why am I here? Why do I get up in the morning? What is life asking of me? So let's look at this and let's step back and really look at the bigger picture. The next slide shows the old narrative of aging. You remember the question, what did you want to be when you grew up? Well, and how did that work for you in terms of who you are now? The old narrative, the one I grew up with, was this one: grow up, work, and decline, retire and die. And at that point in time, life was different in the growing up. It's different. It's a bit different now, but there was the 3 stages of life. It was childhood, adulthood, and then retirement and die. Now, what we see is that in many ways, this linear life is dead. People are not, they're living longer, and there's a whole new phase of life. So the next slide shows that new phase of life. First of all, how do I stop living a default life? Maybe I actually didn't choose this life. And if I look in the rearview mirror, if you've been at an anniversary, if you've gone to a 50th anniversary of your school or something like that, you might see all kinds of people who've lived, some lived a default life. It chose them, and they lived a traditional life from beginning to end, and others who made big choices along the way. What about you? How do I stop living a default life? I'm doing interviews right now for this new book, and the media is the first question they ask, because this is one of the chapters in the book: how do I stop living a default life? And that is, so many people hit midlife and beyond, and they're looking at what's next, living in a longer life. So the next slide is really that new life. Who do you want to be when you grow old? So what we've done here is not what do you want to be or what do you want to do when you grow old. It's who do you want to be when you grow old or when you grow up. Now that you've grown up, what's the point? You see that dip there? That U curve, it's called the U curve of happiness. And if you look at this slide, it's very telling, because the happiest times in life are when we move from childhood and adolescence to adulthood, and later in life when we move into elderhood. As I said, we go through 2 big shifts. One is from childhood to adulthood, but then we outgrow adulthood at some point, and we move into this new life stage. And what we now know from the research and the science is that life stage can go up, can be one of the happiest times in life and one of the most fulfilling lifetimes if we continue to grow. And not, looking in the rearview mirror, it's a good thing to review and look at life and go to a high school or college reunion and look back, but also look forward through the windshield of life. So the next slide is, so how do I start living the good life? If it's not the default life, the windshield is way bigger than the rearview mirror. And so, I love books. I love writing books, holding books, reading books. And I was in a bookstore recently. In fact, it was in Denver. You know the store, big independent bookstore. And I asked the woman behind the information desk, I said, can you tell me where the self-help section is? And she said, looked at me and smiled. Well, if I tell you, she said, won't that defeat the whole purpose? And I thought, oh, that was funny. I went to the self-help section and it's huge. So many people looking for, how do I start living the good life? The pandemic and aging and the end of work as we know it has really caused so many people today to push the pause button and look at through the windshield at what's possible, what's next in life. And this new life phase is not about self-help. It's about self-realization. So the U-curve of happiness is about living the good life. I was backstage recently with a man who founded TED. His name is Richard Saul Warman. He founded TED in the 80s. You know, TED, the speaker YouTube videos that you can see by the millions every day. People around the world by the millions look at him. And he said, Richard, what are you going to be talking about tonight? And I said, purpose. And I said, the other Richard, he's in his 80s. What are you going to talk about? And he said, curiosity. Don't you think that purpose in life and the good life is really ignited by curiosity? I think the Vail Symposium is all about curiosity. It's helping people, ignite their curiosity and look at things from a different lens or a different point of view. And he said, well, I created TED. I created the ultimate dinner party. I decided who are the people I'd like to invite to the ultimate dinner party who are in technology, entertainment, and design. And I would give him a question and we would talk about it over a great dinner and wine. And so he said, who would you invite to your ultimate dinner party? Well, that's what I'm asking you. Who would you invite to your ultimate dinner party? And so there are plenty of choices out there. So I've been looking at the good life now for many, many years. And I'd like to say that the good life to me has 4 characteristics: place, people, right work, and purpose. My co-author, David Shapiro, and I did an advanced depth study of the good life back with Aristotle, Plato, moving into today's reality. The good life is, are you living in the place you love? Well, hopefully you are. Vail, the Vail Valley, the mountains, and other places that you might live as well. Are you living with the people you love? Place, people. You could be in the most beautiful place, but if your relationships are not in good stead, starting with your relationship with yourself and your own sense of self-worth and et cetera, then it's not, the place isn't going to be as beautiful. Are you living in the place you love with the people you love, doing the work you love? This could be any kind of work: creative work, retirement work, grandparenting work, caregiving work. It doesn't have to be paid work or a job, but it's bringing your gifts to the world with a sense of purpose. So the good life is living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love with a sense of purpose. So if you were to talk about living the good life and create the ultimate dinner party, who would you invite? So let's take a little bit of one step forward and look at, is your calling? Let's look at that right work piece of the good life. So the next slide is your calling? Calling is another word, a vocational word for purpose. Viktor Frankl, when I was with him, drew these lines on the blackboard. The horizontal line is failure to success. the vertical line is despair at the bottom to meaning. And he said the lower left-hand corner is a job. And so, sometimes we have a job. It doesn't fit us totally in terms of success nor meaning, but it gets, we have to do it to pay the bills. Then the next one on the right is career. Sometimes we move up the ladder of success, but at certain times we may burn out, we may retire, we may be at a point where we've had enough. And so the upper one on the left is mission. Sometimes we find a sense of mission that doesn't pay us all that much, but it sure gives us a deep sense of fulfillment and meaning. And so then the last upper right-hand corner is calling. This is what I am all about with tonight. Is your calling calling? What is a calling? Well, a calling is something, it's an inner urge to give your gifts away. So let's look at the next slide. It's called the Got a Minute School of Coaching. This is a short session this evening. This could be a 2-day seminar, but I'm trying to put it all together into a very short evening. And I call it the Got a Minute School of Coaching, the napkin tests. To discern your calling at any age or stage, the napkin test is gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. Are you using your gifts, the things that you naturally love to do, on things that you're curious about, passionate about, in environments that fit your values, organizations or environments or projects that really fit who you are? That's your sense of calling. And so gifts, let's just look at the one thing for just a quick minute here. Gifts are things, think about your gifts. Think about your partners and spouses and kids and grandkids and others in your life, your friends, their gifts. A gift has 4 characteristics. Number 1, a gift is something you love to do. Your hand turns to it naturally, whether you're getting paid to do it or not. Think back when you're a kid and you grew up in a family. When I ask people to raise their hands, how many of you have brothers and sisters? Hands go up. Are their gifts the same as yours? And there's laughter in the room because they say, oh no, they're all different. There's 5 of us in the family and we're all different. And I said, when did you start to notice? Oh, really early in life, I started to notice my gifts and others. And so one of the things to do at this point in life or at any point, is to really look at your gifts. So the first thing is you love to do it. Second, others observing you doing it effortlessly and superbly, loving to do it. And third, this is a big one. You can't recall learning it. You've been doing it so long, and maybe not with a degree or a certificate or a gold star, but it's just something you've been doing all your life. And you'd like to do more of it at this point in life as well. And the fourth thing is you like learning more about it and hanging out with other people who are learning more about it as well. And so gifts plus passions plus values, I call it the napkin test. And it's because you can do it. A lot of the most creative ideas have come from things that have been quickly jotted down on napkins. I'm asking you this tonight. Are you using your gifts on things that you feel passionate about in environments that fit your values and are healthy for you? I used to teach with the late Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And before he died unexpectedly at 80 in a bicycling accident in Provo, Utah, he came out with his 8th book, or the book was called The 8th Habit, I should say. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is the one most people know, but he came out with a book called The 8th Habit. And he said, Richard, this is the most important book. And I said, why? And he said, because what we really need to do is to help people discern their calling, their gifts, passions, and values, and help others do the same. As parents, grandparents, friends, leaders, the napkin test is just a quick summary of that. And so as we age, the next question and the next slide is old. Who, me? Well, who are your exemplars? It may not be this guy who is now on, Bruce Springsteen. just came out with a new album. He's on Broadway, came out with a book. He and Obama are doing programs together. I'm not suggesting this isn't a political thing. I'm not suggesting that you even like his music. But are you getting old or growing old? He's growing. And he is, and one of the words you don't want to use these days is this word, still. Still. Richard, you're still writing? Richard, you're still leading walking safaris in Africa? Richard, you're still doing webinars for people like, well, who gets to decide still? You decide. You decide what you want your life to be about. We're in an era now of what I would call long life learning, not lifelong learning, long life learning. We're living for a longer life. We need to continue to grow whole as we age. I was part of a study done by Edward Jones and Age Wave recently that discerned that 1 out of 3 retirees are struggling with retirement, with aging and finding purpose. What about you? You may not be in that age grade, but why do you get up in the morning? Why do you do what you do? And so the final slide here, or next to the final, is unlock the power of purpose. It used to be for me, discover or find purpose, until after many years of study, I finally discovered that it's inside us and needs to be unlocked and brought forward. We need to give a name to it. My big P purpose is to help others unlock the power of purpose. My small p purpose is to make a difference in one person's life every single day in those 1,440 purpose moments, and to look for that. So one way you could do that, if you choose, is to take that default purpose that I gave you, which is grow and give, and write it on a sticky note and put it on your mirror. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, before you go to bed at night, ask yourself, hold yourself accountable. How did I grow and give today? And you'll find yourself knowing more about purpose. You do this for about 5 days, and you'll find what I call a felt sense of purpose. It's not just having purpose, it's having lived purposefully, and the felt sense of making a difference in one person's life that day makes all the difference in the world. So that's the post challenge. And as I said, final slide here is I'm on virtual book tour right now. Who do you want to be when you grow old? The path of purposeful aging. I hope you've had a few ideas sparked by this tonight. And I'm going to stop right now and thank you very much for the privilege of your listening. And Claire, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. You really gave us a lot to think about there, but one of the things I'm sure you've heard a lot, and I'm wondering what your answer is when people say, I'm just too busy to kind of stop and think about this kind of stuff. I've got, kids either, in school, or maybe they're in college, and maybe I have old aging parents, and I'm just too busy to really give this some thought.
Well, as I said, Claire, that first of all, I see all the time with cell phones, mine sitting over here, technology is hijacking the human moment for people today. They're getting pulled off and grabbed off all the time. So that's that busyness, always going somewhere, never being anywhere is a fact of life for us today. But I just would answer that with a big P, small p. Just say, purpose is a verb. It's a mindset. It's an action. Action precedes clarity. Action precedes clarity. So if you do that little P purpose every day, even in a busy life, 1,440 purpose moments, there's one of those moments you can make a difference in someone else's life and make that choice. So I would say that would be my answer.
You've also mentioned that purpose is fundamental to your health, to your happiness. Could you share a few examples of where you see that's the case?
Well, we can look at the medicine, as I said, that the science can now explain purpose. and it's self-evident. You know, every new idea goes through ridicule, violent opposition, and self-evident. Purpose is self-evident. And I was on a program recently with two people who wrote the book, The Telomere Effect. And I don't know if your listeners today know what a telomere is, but every chromosome in your body has a little telomere at the end of it. And if that telomere grows, you age well and you're healthy. If that telomere shrinks, you die earlier and you're less healthy. And what they found, Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for the telomere effect, the Nobel Prize in medicine for the telomere effect, found that purpose was one of the fundamental pieces of helping telomeres grow. So there's all kinds of things. The American Heart Association came out with a massive study on resilience in heart disease and preventative medicine, again, saying purpose is fundamental. So we could go into a lot of ways, but those are two examples.
That sounds great. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our next speaker who's going to be joining you in conversation. We're going to welcome Terry Minger to the program. He's a civic and nonprofit leader. He's the former president and CEO of the Piton Foundation in Denver and former president of the Gary Williams Foundation. Previously, Terry served as president and CEO for the Center for Resource Management. He also served as president and CEO of Sundance Enterprises, president, CEO, and developer of Whistler Blackcomb Resort in British Columbia, deputy chief of staff to Colorado Governor Richard Leider, assistant city manager in Boulder, and city manager in Vail. So Terry, I'd like to welcome you to the program. And you can go ahead and turn on your camera and unmute at this time.
Terry, good evening. And I mean, you've had more callings in one lifetime than I can count. And so congratulations on being here now today. And I want to ask you a few questions. You can, I don't know if you can unmute so I can see you, but one of the questions, the first question is that I mentioned that my purpose or my view.
Thank you.
There you are.
I'm unmuted.
It's better to see you than a black box.
No,
so,
it's
yeah,
an honor to be with you.
Yeah. So my view, Terry, is that purpose is not something to be discovered, as I mentioned, but something to be unlocked. So, in a nutshell, what's your purpose today after all these years of doing all these things? What makes you get up? Why do you get up in the morning these days?
I get up every morning because I feel that there's much to do. There's much undone. There's a lot of problems in the world and a lot of people we need to be talking with. But I was thinking about it in this conversation. My purpose has kind of been something like this, to show up, to engage in the issues and the people of our time, to try to elevate that conversation and to not overstay my welcome. So that's what I've been, purpose has been trying to just show up, be engaged, and be involved in some of the issues of the moment.
So purpose with a big P, show up. Purpose with a little p, make a difference in those places that you show up. So, you know, you can tell when you talk that it's in you. I can feel it. So Terry, I talked about how people can get old or grow old. How are you growing these days? Are you still, I don't use the word still, but I'm going to use it now. Are you still growing?
I'm still growing. I'm going to be 79 in 2 weeks. So I'm still in the game. You know, I've been thinking about it in the following way, which you said earlier. I've thought about to myself, okay, what is it that I want in life at this stage? And the other half of it, almost a Venn diagram, is what can I give at this stage? And where those two things come together is where I try to focus my energies. Two other thoughts is, I think there's this notion of aging out, and that's what I've done in terms of retirement. you've moved on, and I miss being in the foundation world. I miss being in a large organization. But then there's the aging in piece, and that's given me an opening to be able to spend time with, everybody talks about their grandkids. It really is worth it. I've got 2 young boys that I'm able to spend time with, and I'm kind of back in the life with them, but I'm open and I'm learning and I'm kind of available. You know, the other piece of it, Sam Gary, who was one of my mentors, said to me in my retirement, he said, "Terry, you are now free. You don't have to kiss any more frogs." And so that has kind of opened the world to me, and I'm able to be with people I want to be with, do things that I think need to be done, and have some fun doing it.
You know, with this phase of life, oftentimes, and retirement is one way to look at it, sometimes it's freedom from work, freedom from child rearing, freedom from things. But when we make the shift from freedom from to freedom to, that's when we start to look at purpose, or we start to look at other things. And so freedom to, many retirees, I mentioned this in my talk, many retirees struggle with purpose. And as I mentioned, the Edward Jones age wave study showed that, you know, it was a massive study. 1 out of 3 retirees kind of struggling with that, letting go of their identity and their time and all of those things. Did you struggle with retirement?
I probably, the first month, I thought it was like a summer camp and it was good. Then I had to wait.
You cleaned all the closets and did all those things.
Yeah. Exactly. And then reality comes and you say, okay, but what is it that I want to be doing? And I have a whole list of things, but, part of a little thing I've used, whether it be in a governor's office or a foundation or just in the family, is kind of asking myself, rather than asking about purpose, I ask, in service of what? In service of who?
Yeah.
In service of where? All right? And I used to ask that question in foundation meetings.
Yeah.
People bring in ideas and we should be doing this, we should be doing that. I think if you could ask the question, okay, yes, maybe we should, but what are we serving here? In service of who? In service of why? And when I get
that really is the purpose question, the why question. In service, like being a servant leader, and service first, leader second, or that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
I think that's right, and that has guided me through many careers and opportunities and ups and downs, but it's always been the right thing to ask.
Yeah. Do you see others struggling? Do they come to you, or do you see people handling this shift at any age? I mean, it doesn't have to be retirement in the classic sense, but life transitions are a fact of life for people these days, and they're going through them at all ages and stages. But let's just pick retirement. Do you see people, for example, in the Vail Valley or in your sphere struggling?
I do, and it's interesting because I also see, I've done some college teaching. I also see young people coming to me and saying, "I want to have a career like yours. I don't know where I am." And then and I try to walk them through that and say, no, there's not a formula for this. It's something that you've got to find, to discover yourself. But I would just coming back into Vail today, I was out in a restaurant, and some people I hadn't seen 20 years who were in their 80s come up to me and said, "Wow, it's nice to see you." And I said, "What do you?" And both of them said, "Well, we've sold our businesses, we've sold our ranch, and now we're not quite sure what we ought to be doing." And I mentioned to them about this. So yes, I think many people, including my father to some extent, after 50 years and then retiring, and then kind of like, okay, what's next? I think it's a hard road for some people.
Yeah. And do you think, speaking of that, I mean, here you are at a restaurant and you run into people you haven't seen for 20 years, but do you think the Vail Valley is a healthy place for elderhood? I mean, for growing older, it seems in certain ways or it could seem, I should say, to certain folks like it's kind of a youth culture with you have to be healthy to be able to do all the things that are available there for you. But what do you think about the Vail Valley and elderhood?
I think Vail Valley is actually quite a healthy place. If you look at it from the physical, it's this beautiful place with a wonderful environment with all kinds of recreation. And you look at maybe the metaphysical and the spiritual side of it, there's all kinds of opportunities to be in contact with nature and the outside world. It seems to me it's an ideal place, an ideal time to sort of maybe explore, to join, to give, to share. And many of the people that have been involved with the Vail Symposium and other kinds of activities I've been involved with, that's why they came to Vail. There's also this intergenerational thing. It's a community of young people, but it's also a community of retirees. And that's a rich stew. The trick is it possible to maybe have intergenerational events, things we could do formally together, we could share and learn from one another? That probably needs to evolve. But all the ingredients also, it has some of the world's finest healthcare. So it's kind of like all the ingredients are here. The question is, can you make it work?
Is the will, yeah. One of my colleagues, Chip Connolly, uses the term, or has coined the term mentor, being a mentor and an intern. And so it means like somebody who's giving and also growing in certain ways. Do you see ways for that to happen, for people to become mentors, so they're not just like the old era of mentors was like the wise elder under the tree dispensing wisdom? Those days are kind of over in certain ways. I know my grandkids are living in a total parallel reality to what I grew up with in terms of education and work. And it's not just technology, it's the whole business of what's going on in the world. But so what do you think about, is there room for mentors in the Vail Valley?
There's room and there's possibility. One of the reasons that we started the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living was for that very reason. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that we know and we see every day that have the capacity to do mentoring, but they tend to be maybe a little bit on the sidelines, a little bit maybe out of the game. Some of it has to do with the last year and a half we've gone through. But when you have I have conversations with them, they say, Terry, I'm kind of not sure yet how I want to re-enter the world. And we try to say, well, have you ever thought about, with your experience and your background in small groups, what you could be sharing and giving to others, and in your phrase, mentoring? Mm-hmm. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. And so as you look at, do you ever look in the mirror and think, who is this person? like I do these days, who is this person? And you look at it and you kind of smile as you are smiling right now. But the question is, do you ever feel reluctant to tell people your age?
No, I don't. Matter of fact, I just told you I'm sort of
you did, yeah,
bragging about it. No, I look in the mirror and I say, boy, you've been around a while, haven't you, my friend? But the next thing I kind of say is, what are we going to do today? Let's not worry about the hair is not there anymore. Let's just go forward.
Yeah. So do you have daily, final question here, and then I think we'll open it up to the audience for questions, but do you have practices on a day-to-day basis when you get up and do what you do, things that are rituals that are, I would call them purpose-centric, or maybe it's servant-centric, as you were talking about, rituals, or what would you recommend in that area?
Yeah, I try to, on Sunday evenings, write down a few little notes of the past week and maybe what I want to try to do the following week. And then some of the rituals are, well, Judy and I get up and we have a new 7-month-old puppy, and we get on the trail, and it gets happy, and it gets us out on a trail, but it also gets us meeting other people. And then, you know, after lunch, I usually have an agenda, whether it be like this alliance group or some other projects. My wife does as well. She's a retired teacher, and all these elementary teachers are still getting together a couple times a week and trying to figure out how they can give back.
Yeah. And so that gives you a sense of fulfillment. I mean, there's a distinction between happiness and fulfillment. Happiness often is on the outside, and there's reasons to be happy. As I mentioned, E.B. White said, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to savor the world and a desire to save the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." So I think you're talking about that kind of combo platter in certain ways.
That E.B. White wrote is me. I'm willing to do some little things that I actually do that day, but I'm also thinking about the future, about climate change, about the division in this country, about how we need to come together, about how we need to share. So I've got bigger ideas in my mind. It's just a question of where do those play out? In what arena do those play out? Yeah. And I try to do both.
Okay. Final question, and then to Claire, is when you think of what I would call exemplars, I showed Bruce Springsteen, which is not one that most people would pick, but when you think about exemplars of people who have lived purposeful lives, or not the Nelson Mandelas and the Terry, but people maybe people in the Vail Valley, who are exemplars of purposeful living and purposeful aging, who comes to mind for you? Because I think you are that for many people, and you will continue to be that, at least for people like me and others who get the opportunity to know you. But what about for you?
Well, that's very kind. Many people say, yeah, I talked to Terry. He's so yesterday. But back to your question there. There's three come to mind. Walter Orr Roberts was the founder of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, one of the 3 or 4 biggest atmospheric labs in the world. He was my mentor until his death, even though I wasn't a scientist. Sam Gary, an oil guy, but who's the guy who started the P-Town Foundation, who I spent 40 years with. He just died at 93 a while back. Is an unbelievable exemplar, not to me, just to others. And somebody who I just attended their memorial 10 days ago, Richard Lamb, the past governor of Colorado, who had a remarkable career in terms of the common good and the public purpose.
I was the officiant at a memorial service last week for a friend and neighbor, and it always reminds me of 2 things in closing here on this portion, and that is that we have resume virtues, as David Brooks talks about, and eulogy virtues. And I was amazed at how quickly the resume virtues kind of went into the background. They were there. I mean, you've got all these things you've done, but who you are and how you show up, as you said, in people's lives are those eulogy virtues, which that was the emotional, engaging part of the memorial service. And I think that's the power of purpose. It's to have lived a life moment to moment to moment. And the legacy is one of all those moments into a eulogy virtue. So thank you so much for who you are and what you're doing, and the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living that I get a chance to be part of in conversation with you. And so, Claire, back to you.
Thank you so much. And before we get to the audience questions, I just have a few things I wanted to mention. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Terry Minger as basically the father of the Vail Symposium. I mentioned at the very beginning of our program today that we're now celebrating 50 years as the Vail Symposium, and that's due in large part to Terry Minger. So thank you so much, Terry, for doing that. It's one of the many things that you created in Vail that we all still benefit from to this day. So thank you. And Richard, I don't normally indulge the people who type in chat, but I'm going to do it this one time because Sherry Doward is mentioning that she was on the trip with you to Kilimanjaro in 1986, and she's been living in Vail for the past 30 years.
Wow. Hi, Sherry. Sure.
So with that, I will go to the audience questions. The first one comes from Karen Nold, and she asks, have you found differences between men and women in their attitudes towards the purposeful life? And in your travels, have you noticed it in different cultures and different countries?
Cultures, purpose shows up differently in different cultures, but it's always one thing. It's always about others. So the one thing about purpose is it brings meaning to your life and makes a difference or a contribution to others, regardless of the culture. And with respect to gender, yes, that is a very dicey one to talk about, because there's a lot of ways into that depending on the person. But so many people say, oh, I've given. Isn't it time that I get, or I get to do, the largest growing group of entrepreneurs are women over 60 who all of a sudden say, well, I'm ready to break out and do my own thing now. And so, I say, Claire, everyone's an experiment of one. Everybody's an experiment of one. It's hard to generalize about gender or anything else, but I think a lot of people need a moratorium. They need to figure out what's next and do experiments with different things. And whether it's something they're creating or just time away from having raised kids or done whatever they've done. And so I think that I am, as a coach and as a counselor, I'm remiss at giving advice. And I just live in the question with people, and the what's next moment for many, many people who have been caregivers. They're burned out, they're overwhelmed. They need time for themselves and they need to do what they need to do. And I honor that totally. Eventually, it comes back though to isolation is fatal. I'll say it again, isolation is fatal. We are part of community in one way or another, not just family, but as Terry has said, that whole broader community. And so we'll come back and find ways to make a contribution after we've maybe done some self-care.
That just made me think of something else. And I hope you can address then, how do you negotiate this as a couple? As a couple who is entering what Anne Lamott calls the third of your life, and you're trying to find your purpose, perhaps your partner is as well. And I would like to ask this of both of you. And so why don't we start with Richard, but Terry, I would like you to chime in as well.
How much time have you got, Claire?
Oh, no.
I mean, that is such a big one. The highest divorce rate in the country is at retirement. You've done your thing, and that's, there's some standard old stories about that, but all of a sudden we look at each other and we're spending this time together and we realize we really don't know each other. We live parallel but separate and positive lives. And so we have to figure out a new way, a new narrative, a new conversation. And it's very, very difficult. I know no one who has found this to be easy, but maybe Terry did.
Well, my experience is that retirement has brought Judy and I closer together than ever before, partially because she's taught me how to take out the garbage and clean up and do other things. But we both had these professional lives before that took us away from one another, and now we're together. And it's interesting. We're in a place with people and doing work, using Richard's words here, that we love and that resonates with us.
So my next question comes from Sherry Vines, and she's asking about finding your calling. and ask for some ways to help us get clear on what are our true gifts.
Well, I've spent my life on this very question. There's a tool called calling cards that I've developed, and it helps people to discern what their gifts are. But that formula, gifts plus passions plus values, is airtight with the science. I mean, those are the big three questions to answer to discern your calling. There's all kinds of things to discern gifts, etc. But when I look at gifts and I ask people, here's 4 sure ways that you can figure out whether these are your gifts or not. Number 1, look at your job history and look at gifts, passions, and values and the jobs you loved and the jobs you hated and the one you have right now. Secondly, look at your peak experiences. Look at things you've done in your life that have really been peak emotional, engaging experiences, and look at your gifts, passions, and values. Third, do a sounding board check. Have a sounding board, do these calling cards or just give 5 index cards to people and say, what are my gifts to 5 different people and give some feedback. And the last thing is somatics, Claire, somatics or the body. Catching yourself in the act of being yourself on a day-to-day basis. What drains you and what energizes you? When I developed the calling cards, last point here, is that I would cue people during the day. I would buzz them and say, what are you doing right now? And are you loving it 1 to 10 or hating it? And they would say, oh, I never realized how much this was draining me or how much this was energizing me. So there's a lot of things you can do. This is not an easy question to answer, but it's essential from cradle to grave to really look at gifts and help others do the same.
I've got a question from left field, not one of our audience, mine, but you hear about people who move overseas to, in the UK, a lot of people move to Spain, Portugal. I think there are people around here who sometimes relocate to Mexico for, a more favorable climate. What do you think about that as regards to purpose, but just in terms of retirement as well?
Well, 80% of the people who move to someplace new move back because they realize it's not just about climate. It's not just about weather. It's not just about skiing or whatever. It's about place, people, right work, and the way we talked about it, and purpose. And so, growing whole, what's missing most often is the statement I made earlier: isolation is fatal. Going it alone is, and sometimes they feel loneliness is a huge epidemic. I don't know what it's like in the Vail Valley, but you could be in the most beautiful place there, doing the things you love and feel so alone. And so many people do not have one person, and it's more men than women, to your gender issue before, don't have one person who really gets them, who knows what's really going on and listens to them beyond, my grandkids and we traveled here and we're doing this. And it's like, but I didn't know you were going to have a heart attack. I didn't know you were going to have a divorce. I didn't know that you were so lonely, so to speak. So I'm not making this into something more, but I think the point is it's really about tribe. What it really gets down to is and I was part of the Harvard study of adult development on a fellowship way back in the 70s. It's the longest standing study of adult life, 80 plus years in the world. It's still existing right now. And the number one thing that sustains people in aging is relationships.
So my next question comes from Bob Croteau, who writes, he's now 84. He retired when he was 57. And he says, my life space was very different then than at 64, at 74, and now at 84. So as he says, becoming elder is not all the same. So his question is, how can we address it as a progression versus an end stage?
Well, that's a great question. And the way I would answer that, and I'd be interested in Terry's response, but the notion, it's a big one, is growing whole, not old. So growing whole means during those different stages, what part of life grew that wasn't there before, and what part needed to be let go of. So, maybe it's spiritual life, maybe it's physical life, maybe it's relational life, maybe it's something else. But if we're not growing whole, we're dying. So, Terry, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. I would say it has to maybe do as you go through those different decades of saying, okay, what is not finished? What is it that I still am compelled to do and that I can do? All right. I've been here, I've been in the right place with the right people, but now, like, I can't ski the bumps anymore, but I can still ride my bike. I can't run a big organization anymore, but I can still be a part of groups, and we can solve problems together. But kind of like, what is it that you still want to accomplish while you can?
So our next question comes from Ian Williamson, and his question is for Terry, but of course, Richard, you can chime in. Yep. He asks, how do you prioritize your giving?
Well, I spent 6-7 years in the foundation world, which helped me understand a little bit about giving and the issues with it. One of the things that after this crazy career I've had, we're financially fine, but we're not wealthy people, so we have to be careful what our giving is. And so what we do, there's some groups that we cared about for a long time, particularly in the environment. And so and I've been on the board of a bunch of those. And so those we still keep giving to. And then every year we're having this discussion right now. Everybody, of course, is coming forth with, would you fund us? Would you fund us? I go back to answering this question that I said before. Maybe this sounds corny, but it works for me. Ask about in service of what they're doing, in service of who, in service of where. And those that you feel, wow, that really resonates with me, that is really a missing piece, then that's who I would step up with.
And I would add to that, Claire, if I could, the way I and my wife Sally and I prioritize, we're not similar. We give percentage-wise well, but with what we have, but time, and my most precious currency is time. And so I have learned to say no. No is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence, so this is not my priority. I'm sorry, but this is. So we go through this and say, oh, it's going to be so hard to say no to them. But we just, I get asked to do a lot of things with time, and I'm really drawing the line boundary-wise, as my wife is, with our most precious currency, time. So that's one of the factors there.
Well, this next question, I think, goes perfectly with this, and that's around the concept of mentoring. This comes from Lee Remmel, and he mentions that, he's 80 and he has lots of opportunities to mentor, but he finds that many of his peers lack a clue as to how they can give back via mentoring. And they ask him, how is it that you're coaching these young people? So he's asking about sort of broadly mentoring opportunities, but also perhaps more specific here to the Vail Valley. So how would you establish a group that fosters mentoring around by our seniors?
Well, Terry, you can talk about the Alliance for Purposeful Living, but I would just go back and say one thing quickly, and that is be a mentor. The future belongs to the learners, not the knowers. We all know things, but we're learning. We need to learn. And if the pandemic taught us anything, it's just like we're uncertain. And so being a mentor. So Terry, how would you respond?
Well, first of all, I would welcome this gentleman to give us a call at the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living, because right now we're organizing small groups that will do mentoring where we've got one where we set up, for example, with first responders, and then we're going to do some in the environment, some in business. Anyways, so there's tremendous opportunities right here in River City, right here in the Gore Valley, to sign up. And somebody with 80 years old has got a lot to share and a lot to give, and wants to get off the sidelines. We applaud that.
So my last question comes from Meredith, and she's asking, have there been studies that look at the efficacy of support groups for elders?
There's plenty of that out there, but it's growing now. There's something called the Modern Elder Academy that's just spawned, for example, because, back in 47 years ago, the book Passages came out. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for years. But now there's a new narrative needed about the new elderhood. And that's what I think. And as I said, isolation is fatal, but people don't want to necessarily join a typical support group, but what they want is a sounding board. A sounding board is a group of people that they can talk to, small handful of people. That's like the Alliance for Purposeful Living, the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living, where they can talk to that is, and on that sounding board, there are several people. One is a committed listener, one is a wise elder, one is a wise younger, and one is a purpose partner who can dig into things with us. So I think there's plenty of efficacy related research, Claire, about the realities, the positive realities of sounding boards.
Yes.
Thank you both very much. I'm now going to invite Greg Vanerick onto the panel. Greg is with the Alliance for Purposeful Living, and he'll be able to tell everyone a little bit more about this organization. Greg?
Okay, well, thank you, Claire, and good evening, everybody. Great to be with you. And first, I just want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar tonight. It's been terrific. And on behalf of our Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living, my colleagues Art Currier, Buck Elliott, John Horn Cates, Richard Leider, Sarah Smith-Orr, Terry Minger, and I, we thank you. And we want to thank the Vail Symposium, Chris and Claire and the team over there. You guys have been amazing partners. And yeah, so we've started this Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living. It's a new nonprofit where we're inspiring purposeful living. You can read about it there on the slide, but we are basically, why now? As Terry mentioned earlier, we're in this historic moment of coming out of the pandemic where there's been so much loss and pain, but also a real opportunity, a historic opportunity for all of us. So we wanted to give back, and we think it's an opportunity for folks to reimagine, to reinvent, and take this opportunity that Richard's been talking about tonight to be more intentional about our life and our work. And so we want our lives to matter, as Richard said. And so the relevance of this, we believe that purpose is age agnostic. And so it's relevant in the new retirement and the opportunities for new aging that we've been talking about tonight. It's relevant at midlife as you think about the second half and the eulogy virtues. It's relevant in early career as we think about what do I want to do with my life and work and my dreams and family. And it's relevant during transitions or inflection points like the one we're in right now. And so, for me, this has been very impactful. I've been, working on purpose and values and these questions for decades. I've been part of these small group dialogues that we offer. These we call roundtables, where we talk about inside first. And so we at the Vail Alliance want to invite you, join us, engage in this movement for purposeful living. And you can do that, through the means here. We offer small group dialogues, as Terry was talking about, different focus groups. We call them roundtables. We're going to do more talks like this. We're going to do workshops and other things where you can do assessments. And we're going to be working with partners and allies. So we're looking for that. So please engage with us and help us spread the word. You can do it on our website at vailalliance.org by signing up, your email there, registering your interest. You could email us at info@vailalliance.org. And we would love to engage with you and bring you into our programs. We're looking forward to this recording being available on the Vail Symposium website. And otherwise, again, we want to thank you and we want to wish you well with your own purposeful living journey. It's a great opportunity for you. So with that, back to you, Claire.
Greg, thank you so much. And I should also like to mention that we are working on a program right now with the Alliance for Purposeful Living for this winter as part of our winter season, which will kick off in December. And we're hoping that will be an in-person program. Greg, thank you so much tonight. Dr. Richard Leider, thank you. Wonderful program. And Terry Minger as well. We really appreciate your time and your knowledge and wisdom this evening. I hope everyone will join us next week for our mega environmental program. That'll be on Thursday, September 23rd. We'll be starting a little bit earlier at 5 o'clock. Good night, everyone.